okay?
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, great. I want to start by saying thank you everyone for joining us today for a special joint forum on diversity and inclusion. The agenda and the event has been very much led by Debbie Ario from BASNET, and it's been hosted by ourselves, HTF, in honour of Black Lives Matter. So the murder of George Floyd in the US in May sparked a national, then international conversation about institutional and systematic racism within government, statutory and non-statutory organisations, and within society. Symbolised by the profoundly sad statement, "I can't breathe," Black Lives Matter asks society to listen to Black voices, to educate itself on supremacy and privilege, and to rectify and change conscious and unconscious discrimination, and to act and listen, not speak and respond. It is damning that the anti-slavery sector still contains discrimination and so little diversity. How can we do better? And why are we here? We're in these roles because we want to end modern-day slavery. We all already carry our own personal story and path that drives us. I started to think for this event about my own family's path and how it relates to this point. My grandfather was a slave. He was a slave because of racism and because of a belief in a superior race. My aunt was tortured as a child, also because of racism. So if we don't start to properly fight racism and bigotry at every turn and within ourselves and wherever we see it, we as a sector risk becoming part of the problem that we think we're trying to fight. We live in a country that, for all its positives, allowed Windrush to happen over many years. We have a Prime Minister who's previously used highly derogatory language about the appearance of BAME groups. We have our former shadow cabinet and main opposition party being investigated for institutional levels of anti-Jewish racism by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and only the BNP previously have had enough evidence to be investigated like this by the Commission. Now, most of us here are not politicians, but as individuals, we all play a role in our silence, as much as in our actions or our actions, and gaslighting of minorities. Discrimination and silence about discrimination haunts and hurts so many people in this world. This event comes just a week after the commemoration for the genocide in Bosnia, committed due to anti-Muslim racism. And that happened in our lifetimes, on our continent, and on our doorsteps. Mandela said this: "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, then they can be taught to love." We really want this event to be the start of a big and difficult lesson and conversation to yourself, to myself, and in the organizations you work with. We all need to challenge ourselves right now. If everyone around us that we work with thinks like us, talks like us, votes like us, looks like us, and pats us on the back every time we make a statement or tweet, maybe we need to start widening our circles. Confronting society's obstacles a lot of the time means thinking differently, reading views that challenge you. It can mean being unpopular, out of fashion. It can mean finding resistance, being an outcast, and risking work and personal relationships. But if you're not rocking your own boat, you are doing it wrong. Tackling injustice in every century required bravery, tenacity, and integrity, and going against the crowd. And that leads me on to Debbie. I want to say first that HTF feels very, very honoured to be able to host this event with Debbie and BASNET. I met Debbie at the start of my journey into the sector almost 10 years ago, when I was working in the public sector at City Hall. I was writing a report on modern slavery for a conservative politician, and Debbie had founded and ran the NGO Afruka. Afruka had been set up to look at the problems African children and families face, and at the gaps in the UK's child protection system for African children. At that point, West African victims weren't even being recognised in the official NRM data. They were invisible in the data, in policy and the minds of politicians, in police and public. Yet, for example, somehow under the radar, Poppy's Safe House was full of West African victims of trafficking. Debbie was a lone, unique, bold and brilliant voice. She was challenging multiple sectors, multiple communities, religious groups, politicians to do something, to recognise the crimes people of African heritage experience, to recognise the racism and discrimination that victims of African heritage faced when dealing with police, when dealing with the Home Office, and the daily obstacles to justice. Now in 2020, this anti-slavery sector is huge and mainstream, which is great. But Debbie has been fighting this fight for 20 years when almost none of us were around. and we've still got a way to go. And we are very, very grateful to still have a leader in Debbie with us here. It speaks volumes of Debbie and is testament to her dedication to the sector. But while I had originally assumed we would focus on the experience of those with African heritage because of Black Lives Matter and the clear and distinct racism and challenges they face in our sector, Debbie was clear that she wanted to talk about broader diversity and bigotry in our sector. And we know, for example, that along with survivors of human trafficking of West African heritage, survivors with Albanian heritage are also often disbelieved and are also similarly often more likely to be rejected in the NRM and asylum processes. Debbie has led on creating an amazing agenda and set of speakers that we have today. HTF Human Trafficking Foundation is just here to host. I'll mainly be trying to silently keep things to time by using these sort of passive-aggressive signs. So speakers, do keep an eye on me because I will be putting these up if you start overrunning. And also, please, everyone note that this is going to be recorded and made public. I'm now very happy and proud to be able to hand over the reins to Debbie, who will be chairing today's event. Debbie, you're on mute.
I know, I keep doing that. I keep doing that, so sorry. Well, it's good to see everybody here this afternoon. So, I mean, this event is happening on the back of the statement that we issued at BASNET about a month ago in relation to Black Lives Matter. And we issued that statement because we felt that it was important for us to start talking about issues around racism and equality and diversity and inclusion issues in the sector, because these are issues that are very, very germane. They're very important. And of course, I mean, we work with victims from a particular, ethnic group, which is African, mainly African. But then we also know that many of our users receive services from elsewhere. And we know the stories they tell us about some of their own experiences. And even I myself, I've been in the sector for 20 years as a CEO. And I know some of the experiences that I have had in the course of my career in this sector. And so there's so many dimensions to all these issues. And it's important and I think timely for us to start to talk about these issues and to see how we're going to address them. So what we've done in partnership with the Human Trafficking Foundation, and I really want to say a big thank you to Tamara and to Katie and to Rachel for all the work they've done, because they've practically helped to put all this event together. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And that's the sort of partnership that we should be looking to have in our sector, where, you know, the strong ones support the weaker ones. That's how it should be. So anyway, in terms of moving forward, we've been able to put together a group of speakers to focus on different subject areas. We want to look at policy issues. We want to look at issues happening in academia. We want to look at issues happening, in the legal sector. We also want to talk about the experiences of victims themselves, survivors themselves, because I think there's no way we can have these conversations without putting survivors at the center of it. It's very important to do that. So I'm going to call on different speakers to offer their contribution. I think we have 5 minutes per speaker, and we're going to be having periodic questions and answers as we go along, so we don't leave everything to the very end of it. And I think that at the end of it, we want to ask people some questions around what should happen next, because it's important to get the viewpoints of everybody in the room today. So on that note, I want to call on our first speaker, who is a good friend of our charity Africa and of course BASNET, and she's been a leading light in Parliament in relation to work on modern slavery and human trafficking, and she's been in this sector for a very long time. She's a very good friend of our sector, and that's Baroness Lola Young, OBE. I mean, Baroness, you have 5 minutes to give yours a very short presentation, a few remarks about the subject matter today. Thank you very much, Baroness.
And thank you very much, Debbie and Tamara and all the colleagues involved in this. I will do my best to keep to the 5 minutes. No doubt I'll get that sign, but just bear in mind I'm on my iPhone, so I can only see one other person than myself. So yeah, okay, look, there's an awful lot to say, and so what I say might come out sounding rather blunt, as a result of having to sort of stack it all into a 5-minute presentation. The first thing I want to say is about, obviously this is a moment that has arisen from, in this particular instance, what's happened with Black Lives Matter. But it isn't only about that, as we all know, because as Debbie will attest, who's been at this much longer than I have, in all the different sectors across the country, we know that this is an issue, a big issue, systemic racism, and it manifests itself in lots of different ways. So I'm going to ask, people to do 3 things. It's the new 3 R's, as it were, which is quite convenient, I think. Reflect, resolve, and then you'll see results. So first of all, in terms of reflection, you've got to look at the history of the anti-slavery movement. And I think, think about it, whenever somebody who's involved in this sector invokes the ending of the transatlantic slave trade, often they get the dates wrong. They use the term the abolition of slavery for 1807 when it wasn't, and they always refer to William Wilberforce. Stop it. There's another part of that story, whether it's the 200 workers from Manchester who signed against their own interest in support of abolishing slavery, whether it was Olaudah Equiano or Ignatius Sancho or any of the other Africans who had been formerly enslaved, who very much articulated this struggle. And if we ignore that history, then it's completely not on. And if Black Lives Matter teaches us one thing, is that history is really, really important. Another thing to reflect upon, this issue of making statements. It's a bit like the modern slavery statements. Anybody can say we have 0 tolerance for slavery. Yeah, great. So how many people are going to stand up and say we do actually quite like slavery, or we don't have 0 tolerance for racism? Of course, we must take that as read. What you need to be saying in that statement is you abhor racism, of course you do, but you also need to be saying what it is that you're going to do in order to end it within your organization and within the sector within which you work. And there is this issue about how deeply felt Black Lives Matter and the long tail of events and abominations that have happened before that lead us to this particular position. It isn't only about this one issue. So the next thing is resolve. The thing is to resolve to take action. And also to resolve to think about some of these discourses on slavery that we use. In circles that I'm around at the moment, we're all saying we don't want to be called BAME anymore. I'm not a BAME. I don't know what BAME is. You've got to disaggregate that group of people rather than homogenize them. We've also got to think about how we use that term slavery, enslavement, modern slavery. Again, what are the historical antecedents of that? And are we in some way, when we use slavery as if it was the same as somebody being paid below the minimum wage, it isn't the same. So let's be much more, let's have much more discretion about how we use the terminology. In terms of results, I'm thinking about, you need a time frame which says, by this particular moment, we will have done this. And I'm particularly thinking of the NGO sector. I will say that NGOs, we have a much higher expectation of you than we would do of corporations and other companies. And yet, in a lot of the work that I'm doing, I'm seeing companies, corporations, doing more innovative, more creative, and more extensive work on discrimination, on racism, than I'm seeing in some of my NGO partners. So what exactly is it that you stand for as an NGO? What differentiates you from other organizations? You need to think about a much more nuanced approach. I've said this to Debbie and to others. I don't even note anymore when I walk into a room that's considering this subject and there aren't any other Black people or brown people in that room. That is not noteworthy. And what a state that is to be in. So if we only continue to think about Black and brown people at the end of the of what it is we're looking at, as the victims, as the people whom we're helping, that is, again, it produces the wrong frame of mind. We want something from the sector which is enabling, which is opening up opportunities and the doorways into really getting a platform from which to make real advances on this subject. And by that, I don't mean appropriating. This isn't about, you know, an organization, particularly if they've got very few Black people or brown people working in that organization, saying they're going to lead on this and they're going to lead on that. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how are you going to facilitate organizations to get the same kind of platforms, the same kinds of people listening to what they say as some of the larger NGOs. And my sort of final remark would be, it's very obvious that, to me at any rate, it's obvious to me that if you have a diversity of ways of thinking, perspectives, talking, considering, reflecting, resolving, all of those things, then we will get this notion of working together. At the moment, we're not really working together. We're working on these different paths, and that really needs to change if we're to do something about eliminating the abhorrent trade in and the exploitation of people around the world, no matter what color or what ethnicity they are. So that's me finished.
Thank you so much. Excellent. So we need to be reflecting, we need to be resolving, so that we can have positive results. That's what you're saying, essentially.
Yeah, I think yes, I didn't phrase it very well, but I think the resolve is about the real steadfastness, because this is difficult. I think it was, you know, it's already been said that there are some difficult conversations that will have to go on. There'll be some uncomfortable conversations that have to take place, and everybody will feel slightly discombobulated, but you've got to work through that. You've got to have the resolve to say that with your eyes on the prize, there's something worth going through this pain for. At the moment, we're not in that place.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Thank you so much. No, that's good. Thank you so much. So very good. Thank you. So thank you, Baroness. I mean, sorry, I call you Baroness because, you know, I'm Nigerian. And like I told you, we love our titles. So Baroness, thank you so much. And, you know, we'll put that up later in the Q&A. I'm sure people will have some questions for you following that. Can I now please call on the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Dame Sarah Thornton, to give her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Debbie and colleagues for raising this issue, and thank you, Tamara, for kind of stepping forth from the HTF and saying we really want to do something about this. This issue needs to be a concern for us all, and I think it's great that so many people are involved today. It's, you know, often said now that what's happening in the United States, we'll look back on and say it's as important as when Rosa Parks refused to sit on that segregated bus all those years ago. But it's then also sometimes said, but that's an American issue, it's different. I think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror, very much so. This is not to be kind of dismissed as an American issue. I think this is very much an issue for us, for our sector, and for our country. In terms of my role as the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, you know, it's about encouraging good practice, and I think a desire and an ambition around inclusion and diversity is absolutely the sorts of good practice, to use the legal term, that I want to encourage. So really pleased to be asked to play a very small part here, because I think my sense is that I want to listen. And I think that the point that Lola's just made about actually some of those conversations, they're crucial, but they might be uncomfortable. But that does not mean that they are not productive. It is absolutely essential that we listen in all humility. I've had a couple of conversations with Debbie recently, but also I had a meeting with Debbie and other colleagues in the sector. And I found that really useful to listen to their experiences as leaders, their concerns about whether they are seen as kind of part of those who are really wielding power and doing stuff, their experiences in their own organisations, just about the look and feel of organisations. So I think there's a substantial internal issue, and I think it's important for all of us to listen to the experiences of colleagues. The second issue that struck me, we talked a little bit about service delivery, which of course is important. And I was just reflecting on one small example, and it was a conversation Debbie might remember that we had during COVID. And it was about a very legitimate concern that it was very difficult for the support providers to get cash to victims who were in the national referral mechanism. And so the proposal was that plastic cards would be used, payment cards, and that was seen as a much easier way, a safer, a more secure way, a more certain way to get money to people who really needed it pretty desperately. And we just kind of got to a conversation point in the meeting where we thought, okay, we've got a great plan here. And Debbie then said, but hold on a minute. A lot of the young people that I support, you know, she didn't quite say don't go to the co-op, but that's what she meant. She said that they will be buying their food and supplies from very different ethnic supermarkets, which don't take the payment cards. And I think kind of there was a feeling which was, yeah, but hold on a minute, we just need to get some money to somebody. And I think, well, that maybe is an example of a kind of sort of structural racism that, you know, we just think that everybody's got to be the same. And maybe it's too late when people are desperate to get money to survivors and victims' hands. But actually, what have we done beforehand to think through those issues in the way in which actually these things just, you know, that they're unconscious. They happen so easily. And yet we end up with a situation where, you know, it puts Debbie in a difficult position, because I think it makes it sound like she's not agreeing with what everybody thinks, but actually for quite understandable reasons. So that was kind of a reflection for me. It's not about, you know, bias, it's about actually how these structural issues can really impact victims. And another issue that struck me in the last month or so as well was we were looking at national referral mechanism data. I love data. And of course, we've got all the nationalities. But in terms of UK citizens, we don't break it down by ethnic group, because actually we don't even have that on the form. Now, hopefully some of you, like my office, have responded to the Home Office with where should they go to on stats and data and the NRM, and we put that in kind of big letters, big words, because we think it's really important. But again, that's something which just somehow has happened over the years and nobody's thought it was very important. And of course it is really, really important. So what struck me, you know, in the media and even the leader of the opposition talking about going on unconscious bias training. And, you know, there is a big debate about whether actually the science of that is that secure. I actually think while there might be issues of unconscious bias, you know, there are issues of structural racism where actually we just don't think about people who are not like us. All of us find it much easier to deal with people who are like us. I like women who are my age with my sort of background. I understand them because I understand me. But actually, we need to think about these kind of structural issues in the way we kind of go about our basic business. So I'm really up for that crucial conversation. I'm getting the sign from Tamara. I was about to say, I'm here to listen. If it's uncomfortable, that's fine. And looking forward to this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's very useful. I mean, firstly, I need to say thank you so much for the role you've played so far in all of this, because we cannot move forward if you do not have people like yourselves being open to actually work in partnership, you know, across the board, you know, with, you know, different groups and different communities. So thank you so much for that. And of course, we'll be taking questions afterwards. So I want to call on Police and Crime Commissioner Mark Burns-Williamson, OBE, who is the chair of the National Anti-Trafficking and Modern Slavery Network, to give us some remarks. Mark.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just coming over as a little bit broken up at this end, so hopefully everybody can hear okay. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to take part in this from yourselves and the Human Trafficking Foundation. I'm sure I've met and worked with a number of colleagues potentially on this call. And I agree with some of the comments that have already been made around, you know, clearly this is a time to really better understand some of the key issues around racism and the things falling out of the Black Lives Matters movement. And I am a history and politics graduate as well. So these things are really interesting for me on a personal level. And we absolutely do need to have a better perspective and understanding of historical context. So like Sarah, I was in a national network meeting yesterday, and it is very important to listen and really take on board what people are saying around representation, whether that's around equality, diversity, inclusion, and of course the sector itself, in terms of the findings, is quite stark, isn't it, around feelings of racism and how people are treated within the sector. So it's a real call, I think, in sense as well. I mean, for my part, I mean, I'm a police and crime, and one of my key roles, of course, is to work with the chief constable and hold him in this case and the force to account for police generally, as well as budgets and set police and crime plans. But it's a real interest in modern slavery, and I accept around what the language in terms like BAME, and actually breaking down what are the components of that, as well as the term modern slavery itself. So it's time to think again around the whole use of language and technology. I think policing more generally is clearly at the heart of many of these issues as well. And yes, we have seen those horrific incidents in America regarding some of the police activity, but we absolutely cannot be complacent around issues we have in this country as well, in the UK. And policing absolutely does need to look at not only the representation within policing, but how they engage and go about working with our communities. And I've certainly always been a huge advocate of neighbourhood policing and making sure that we are building those relationships and very local links to better understand what those key issues are within our local communities. And certainly I endeavoured to do that individually in my own role, but to encourage my colleagues to do that as well. I do play a leading role within the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and we are actively looking at some joint work with the National Police Chiefs Council around ethics and workforce and diversity. I think we need to come up with some quick solutions to this, because we are in a period of police officer recruitment, and if we don't actually make some big changes here, then we will potentially miss some big opportunities, I think, around policing and how it conducts itself over the coming years. So I'm hoping we can come up with some really good recommendations and working with government and with yourselves and many others to yes, have some uncomfortable conversations, but then actually have some tangible outcomes to what these partnership discussions need to be. And I guess just to summarise some of the issues we have been looking at regarding the sort of trafficking and modern slavery agenda, there's clearly still an ongoing need around training and awareness raising, not just within policing, but within the public services and the voluntary and third sector, to make sure everybody is cited on what some of those key issues are. Obviously, looking at how we can better improve support to victims and survivors of trafficking and what are human rights abuses, and to better improve the Modern Slavery Act, which was introduced 5 years ago now, but absolutely, in my view, does need to be brought up to date to reflect some of these key issues that we are discussing today. So thanks for inviting me just to say a few words, and I'll give my commitment to work with you to raise my voice in support of some of these really difficult conversations that we need to have. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mark. That was very useful. The police, of course, have been at the forefront of, anti-trafficking work. I mean, the Metropolitan Police have done a lot of work, but of course, there have been mistakes made, and we all have to acknowledge that. But I guess in the spirit of joint working, we can only continue to improve in that sense. So thank you so much for your contributions. So we have about 5 minutes or so to take some questions from the audience. So does anybody have any questions or any comments in relation to the presentations by Baroness Lola, Sarah, and of course, Mark? Any questions? Please raise your hand, and I need to see if I can find any raised hands. Anybody? Just 1 second.
Alessia, me?
Oh, okay.
Hello,
Yes,
hello,
please.
Debbie.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Hello.
Hi.
I would just like to say this. It's great that we are here today. But
sorry, can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Alessia, and I'm a learning and sharing officer for the International Community Organisation in Sunderland.
Yeah.
We raise awareness of modern slavery. And I'm finding it very interesting, this session today, and thank you for having me. What I'd like to see is facts happening, not just words, because it's great that we are here today, but then tomorrow it's all forgotten, and people from different ethnic minorities are just forgotten. So we need to make a stand. Yes, we're going to talk about it, but we're going to discuss it around the table, and there has to be actions, not just words. Yeah. It's got to be put in practice, because there's people from different ethnic minority groups that are forgotten, and it happens in the public sector, with the police, with the recruitment and everything. So I just want to see a big change in things happening. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Any quick comments on that before I take the next question?
Just quickly to say, obviously, I think that's absolutely right, and that it's the action bit that goes missing, isn't it? So that's where people need to be really strong and keep that in mind, and have not just any old actions, but actions which are measurable and by which they're held accountable.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And Professor Gary Craig, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, well, just two comments, really. One directed to support Lola's point about reading history. The 1807 Abolition of the Slave Trade Act. Wilberforce was prominent in pursuing it in Parliament, but probably what was more important in the long run was the huge mass movement which developed amongst working people in this country and elsewhere, but also, of course, the actions of the slaves themselves, who rose up in rebellion in a number of places and put a huge amount of pressure on those who were against abolition. And just a point for Sarah, 6 or 7 years ago, the Anti-Trafficking Monitoring Group produced a report which suggested that if you were black and from outside of Europe, you had a very markedly reduced chance of being accepted as a victim of slavery as those who were white and from Europe. So the conclusion had to be that the NRM was structurally racist in the way it was making decisions about potential victims. So I wonder if she has her eye on that particular ball, and whether she is perhaps going to revisit that issue to see whether that is still the case. Thank you.
Yeah. So the question was is Lola or Sarah or both?
Well, if I just come in on Gary's point, we have been looking at these issues, which is why I've raised the point about lack of data on ethnicity. We have nationality, but not ethnicity. We need to start to have that for UK, but overall, the different experience of different groups depending on whether they were EU or non-EU, is something that we are looking at very carefully. We will be publishing more data in the annual report later this year.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to take some of these questions from the chat room. So we have a question from Batseba. Sorry if I got it wrong. How do we ensure and encourage these conversations are led by survivors from diverse backgrounds? How do we encourage that these conversations are led by survivors from diverse backgrounds? Does anybody
Debbie,
want to take that? Sorry?
Debbie, it's Mark. Perhaps if you could just come in. I think one of the keys, one of the keys to this is working with third sector voluntary groups locally who, you know, are often critical in providing that support to victims and survivors. And if we develop those relationships, I've noticed Yvonne from who are an excellent organisation based in West Yorkshire, who we work with others, Hope for Justice, that often they are the best conduits to ensure that those voices can be heard. Because it's about gaining the trust in those relationships for people to come forward and speak up from clearly what they've suffered in very traumatic circumstances.
Excellent. Yes, please.
I was just going to say, I think building, supporting survivor leaders is absolutely essential. And I see that Min has put a note on the chat about the importance of building capacity. I mean, we need to give people platforms, but we also need to build capacity in that area. And, you know, very much enjoy working with Min and thinking about how we can support her colleagues as they are encouraged in this really important work.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to move on because we cannot take all the questions now. Thank you so much for the contributions, Sarah, Lola, and Mark. And obviously, we look forward to continue working with you on this subject. I'm now going to take the next set of speakers. And first of all, I'm really delighted to introduce our next speaker. We call him MD. He's a member of BASNET. He was trafficked and he's been very open, talking about his own experiences of trafficking for forced marriage, which is an area that you know, lots of people are not even aware of that is happening. Hamid has been very active in pushing for change in how the system works for victims and survivors based on his own experiences, of course. So if you're there, MD, I would like to call on you to please give your remarks. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, thank you everyone. I hope everyone can listen to me. I'm from Newcastle. My name is MD. I'm one of the survivors of modern slavery and trafficking inside the UK. And of course, I am from a diversified community. So I was waiting 3 years for this moment. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I've got all the big peoples here probably will have from me some interesting questions. I may be a bit hard and bit harsh, so please, I do apologize before I start. So before I start, I just want to show you, these are the letters, 2018, 2019. I sent it to Victoria Kinson MP, asking about her, what is the precautions, what is the measures she's taking to serve, to serve the victim of modern slavery and trafficking. Those are all copy-paste answers. Thank you so much. So next one, I'm going to do a little presentation. So I urge all of you, if you have any questions, please come back to me. So I will start that now. So let's go for it. If I can share my screen, please, if that is okay. Yeah. I hope everybody can see me now. Okay, thank you. So today's topic is about the drawbacks and of NRM and the injustice in the UK. As you can see, my name is MD Momindul Hamid. I was one of the refugee leader for UK this year. Next slide is this. living in the NRM, how does it look? I will just tell you a couple of experience I had, which is, it is a lengthy process. First of all, I was waiting 3 years for it and going through lots of trauma. So we really have to work on it. Second thing, there is a lack of support and the busyness of caseworkers. Caseworkers nowadays are so busy, they can barely give us any spare time. And it is very, very horrible, and it is getting too much nowadays. I think the organization who is involved with NRM and the sister concerns of Salvation Army and other organizations, they need to look after these issues pretty quickly. Third, the punishment after getting NRM conclusive ground. It's a good news for me. I just got my conclusive ground positive in May, or even though there's COVID-19 was going on, but I was being kicked out from the NRM service for 3 years. I was supporting myself using that money. I don't get any support anymore. So it was horrible for me now, actually, at least to live on 38 pounds, which I was living on 65 pounds a week previously. So what is doing that now? This is living in a trauma and living in the fear of home office every single day. And just to add with that one, there is a shameful act from the police. I do apologize. I also work as a volunteer for fire service. I had profound tribute for the law and justice of this country. But I would like to add that that's the shameful act of police of dropping the cases of modern day slavery. It's not acceptable at all. My case was dropped, or whether there was a profound evidences was there. I was helping the police, but nothing happened. It was just dropped without any cause. And I couldn't appeal because I didn't have money and I didn't have access to legal aid that time. Moving on to the next one, just to quickly tell you that where am I at the moment? So everyone is asking, what am I doing? Living in 38 pounds a week, again, after 3 years. No right to work because I'm an asylum seeker. And there's a severe possibilities for me to go back to indirect slavery again, to earn £2 an hour, £3 an hour, because I had a British-born child here. I got a contract with him every week to see him, but the extra money I used to get, I used to use it to go to see him. I don't get it anymore. So if I don't have any options, I have to go back to that indirect slavery, and nobody did care about it. So the last one is the living in PTSD, and NRM has just left me on the middle of counseling session. I was been waiting to have a PTSD diagnosis pretty soon, and NRM has left me nowhere from my counseling session. So now I have to wait in a queue, which is Talking Help Newcastle, probably 6 or 7 months to just to get a counselor. Moving on to the next, thank you so much everyone for listening to me. I will keep that very short, but what is my hope? My hope is still continues. I'm studying LLB law in scholarship in Northumbria University at the moment. My ultimate desire is to be a barrister and represent the victims of modern day slavery and trafficking to reform the system and in the future. I would like to work with the government, really, honestly. I would like to work with the people who make these policies to show them that this is not really working. The Modern Day Slavery Act 2015, there is a lot of drawbacks. There's a lot of things to be done. People need to listen to us. The next thing is any burning questions, and you can find me in my Twitter, which you can see, and also I have got a website as well. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, MD. I mean, your experiences are very, very typical of the experiences of many victims. Once you work with Africa, some people have been, I have a young girl who, when we went to rescue her from a prison in Manchester, that was in 2012, and she's still in the system. She is still in the system 8 years later. Her girl is now 8 years old. She had the girl in prison. That child is now 8 years old. And I cannot believe that it would take 8 years to make a decision on a case. And of course, the other issue you highlighted in relation to getting your NRM conclusive grounds decision and becoming penalized and punished for it is totally out of order. And we know this is happening. And this is some of the injustices. So I wasn't going to preach today because I said to myself, I'm going to chair this conference. So I'm not going to, I'm going to keep my opinions to myself and let other people talk. But you've just, kind of like sparked a light in me, MD. some of the young people, the trauma that they go through, not only from their experiences of trafficking, but the experiences of the system is absolutely appalling, and it's not justifiable in this day and age. And so this is part and parcel of the racism in the system. Now, we invited the Home Office to this event, and the Home Office could not find one single person to come to this event today. So as far as I'm concerned, it means that they're not taking this issue seriously enough. It means that the plights of victims from ethnic minority backgrounds are not important enough for the Home Office, otherwise they will be here. And I think that has to be said. So thank you so much, MD, for your contribution. Thank you. So I want to move on very quickly and call on Deborah Lashley-Bob.
Thank you very
Deborah,
much.
yeah, I just want to just quick introduction, because we've done so many case work with you in relation to many of our young people who were trafficked, and you've been very excellent in relation to how you've represented them. So I just want you to give us a snapshot of what the issues are within your sector and some of the ideas in terms of how this can be resolved.
All right, thank you. Debbie, you've given some indication of who I am and what I do. And yes, I am a human rights practitioner, and my speciality is immigration law. I'm working currently with migrant legal action in Southeast London, but I would say that this afternoon I'm speaking in my personal capacity. So the views I express, my opinions are simply mine. And
okay.
Separate from that, I think, Debbie, perhaps, and what no one perhaps knew either, is that I am the descendant of a child slave, because we've done our family tree, and I know where we have and how we can trace our roots back. Which brings us to where we are today. And I'm always delighted to speak after MD, because MD represents the core persons. We are all here because of victims. Survivors. And I think when we lose sight of that, we lose sight of everything that is important. And MD, I want to follow on with some of the crucial issues that you've raised, because the difficulties we have are structural issues, systemic issues. And looking at what you spoke about in terms of the national referral mechanism, I cannot agree with you more. I have considerable concerns about the length of time that processes are taking, completely unreasonable. If it were an individual suffering the level of trauma that some of my clients are suffering, and asked to wait the length of time, the years that they have been asked to wait for support, it would be completely unacceptable. Why is it that this is being allowed to happen to a group of persons who are recognized from the outset as being particularly vulnerable? That is a major systemic error that has to be addressed. If we look at the European Convention on Action Against Trafficking, if we look at Council Directive 3611, throughout all of those documents, clear admission that psychological trauma is fundamentally an issue and must fundamentally be addressed in assistance. Is that happening? No, it's not. That must be addressed. In terms of the length of cases, Debbie, yes, you're actually right. Some have taken as long as, in my experience, 3 or 4 years. Your experience is that some have taken 8. But I think when we're looking at NRM records, we're tending to hear in reports that processes are taking about a year. That is not my experience. And so delay, the length of time that it's taking for decisions to come through is an issue. Not only is the length of time an issue, it is the quality of the decision. What is also happening is that you again get cut and paste decisions. Sometimes you will get decisions which refer to facts and situations that are completely irrelevant. Oftentimes we'll challenge those, and there is a way to challenge those. In the first instance, it will be the first responder. In the second instance, solicitors have always had the opportunity on their clients' instructions to seek judicial review of those decisions. And in every case where I have sought judicial review of an unreasonable conclusive grounds decision, it has been successful. It hasn't even gotten to the stage where we've had to actually start proceedings. Letter before action, Home Office caves in. You know, so there's a clear admission that the quality of the decision making is in question. MD, you spoke as well about the punishment of persons once they do have a conclusive grounds decision, and the fact that there's that cliff edge situation, and all of a sudden there's no support. This round of persons and services that were previously available suddenly disappear, and you're left abandoned. Now, I know Lord McCall of Dulwich is looking into that, and certainly there are persons looking to see and trying to make progress in terms of changing that situation. So that's something that is in hand. I think, lastly, what I would like to look at is, and again, MD, this refers to you, managing from the very outset what an applicant's expectations could possibly be. The only way that can happen is before the NRM, before anyone considers going into the NRM, they have full and comprehensive advice as to what avenues would lead to their immigration status being regularized, and also being advised and told about what those processes actually involve. How many persons know if they are going to be thrust into the NRM and making a claim for asylum, they will not be able to go and visit their family at the end of that process for a further 5 years. Clients that I have had have said, well, look, I recognize I have been trafficked, but I am not prepared to wait for 5 years to visit my elderly mother who may or may not last 5 years. And so they have chosen not to go into the NRM. Other clients I have had, when they've understood, all right, you can approach the police, they will investigate the claim for you, but there is not necessarily going to be a prosecution that follows. Persons have said to me, look, Deborah, I am suffering enough trauma. I have had enough interviews as it is. I am not going to choose to go into a further investigation that has no ultimate benefit for me. Now, all of these discussions are taking place with persons who, A, may be illiterate, B, more likely than not, are suffering some degree of trauma, and the issues that have to be discussed are complex. The concepts are complex. And that cannot be done in the space of an hour or two. At present, legal aid funding comes into play for a person who is making a solely trafficking case only after they have been referred into the national referral mechanism. In my opinion, that is too late. The advice must come, comprehensive, detailed advice must come pre-NRM. So there are a lot of issues, a lot of fundamental core issues that have to be dealt with. And I was very pleased when I received the email that it said quite clearly, Debbie, this is not an event, it's a process. And I think that's the view we have to take. So we're introducing these issues, and I'm very much looking forward to helping as far as I can in making change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Some of the issues, well, all the issues you raise are actually very, very germane, very important. And of course, you know, your last point in terms of what happens next, I will deal with that towards the end of the sessions. But certainly, like as you said, this is not an event. This is a process. This is the beginning of a process, and there's still a lot more work to be done in relation to addressing those issues. So thank you so much. Can I now please call on Jamila Duncan-Bosu, co-founder of the Anti-Trafficking Labor Exploitation Unit at LU, to give her remarks. Jamila, are you there?
I am. Hang on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So I must admit, when I was asked to speak today about diversity in the anti-trafficking sector, I had a certain degree of skepticism. I have been practicing employment and compensation law in this area since 2006. And more often than not, the only non-white people in the room or in the employment tribunal or court where the compensation claim were being brought would be myself and the client. It's now 2020 and unfortunately not a huge amount has changed. I took the view that a lack of diversity in the sector was either something that the sector didn't want to acknowledge or didn't really see as a problem, as after all, good and important work is being done. But I can't stress enough that individual organisations and the sector itself works best for victims of trafficking, works best for victims of slavery, when there is a diverse background and a multitude of experiences that can be drawn on to better assist our clients. So I've certainly had situations whereby I was attempting to bring a compensation claim for a client. There was, you know, cynicism about the client's credibility and some of the comments that she was making. Actually, the support worker who was assisting that client had come from an organisation which had a diverse background. So while she herself had never been to southern India, she'd been, you know, she had colleagues who she could speak to, and she was able to relay to us that certain things the client was saying was actually part of her cultural background. I've had clients where it was suggested that there's some kind of mental health issue. Again, it was a support worker coming from an organisation which had some diversity who was able to say, no, actually what's happening here is it's a juju ritual. This is someone with a deep-seated fear, and this is why they're acting in a particular way. So in those circumstances, having support providers who are fully aware of some of those issues, who had some, you know, who had colleagues they could go back and discuss these things with, assisted us in being able to bring a successful compensation claim. But the experience that client had was entirely different. They were, you know, it's supported through the process. Equally, I've had clients who said to me, you know, I've in the course of preparing something, I've discovered that actually the name that they've given me isn't the name that they use. And when I've pushed it further, I've been told that it's actually, I was assisted by this particular support organisation. They had difficulty saying my name because it's not an English name, and they looked angry, so I've changed my name.
Oh, wow.
So these are all examples of where the client's individual needs, their specific needs, I could have fallen through the gaps, or were picked, or didn't fall through the gaps because of that diversity in the organisations that are being worked with. There is an issue of diversity in the legal sector, full stop. So that's not something I'm going to attempt to tackle today. But I think certainly where I've been acting for victims of trafficking, my own personal experiences have assisted those clients who don't come from a white English background. And equally, the diversity within the organisation, diversity of experience has assisted those clients. So I started by saying that I had a degree of scepticism, but I am actually greatly cheered by the fact that we've convened to have this discussion, that Debbie has, you know, convened BASNET, and absolutely I'll take my hat off to you for that, because the statement that you put out raised, you know, points that I had been raising for a decade essentially. So I'm really, really cheered that BASNET is in existence. I'm entirely cheered by the fact that the Anti-Slavery Commissioner has agreed to champion these issues. So I think I want to end my remarks by laying down some challenges. So I'm an employment lawyer by training. When I was in private practice, I regularly dealt with discrimination complaints, and I was acting for employers who had been found to have discriminated against employers. And often the thing they would do would rush to circulate policies so that boxes could be ticked, or, you know, say that they were going to have a non-white intern so they could tick some kind of box. I think the challenge for us in this sector is not to do small tokenistic changes, but go for big, powerful changes that make real differences. So I know it's been said a couple of times before, but I think that really, really requires us to have some open, frank, and difficult conversations. It requires us to all understand that we have prejudices. It requires us to understand that we have unconscious biases. But the minute we all recognise that and accept that, that's how we get ourselves into a position to make real change. Now, what else can we look at? So with my organisation, ATLU, one of the things we did was sit down and look at what are our organisational values? What is it that we want to do? What's our plan? We also kept in mind the public sector equality duty. So the public sector equality duty was brought, as some of you may know, was brought in following the death of Stephen Lawrence. And it was something that was brought in to ensure that, you know, public authorities, organisations kept at its heart the requirement to try and eliminate discrimination, to try and level playing fields, to make sure that everybody could access and compete in the same way. And that applies just as much to other sectors. It applies in this sector as it does to any other. So one of the things that we did, we looked at our board. So Apple's very good. We've got a diverse board. So we were able to say, yeah, we think that we're ticking the box doing that. But we looked at other things. We looked at recruitment. You know, what language are we using when we put out adverts? So we're actually in the middle of a recruitment round at the moment. I'll be interviewing again in a couple of minutes. But we looked at the type of language that we were using. Who was that attracting? What message did it give out about our organisation? So that's something that you could all be doing. That's a quick step. Have a look at your board. Who's on your board? How are you making those board appointments? Are you going back to your same personal contacts and and recruiting both your board and your staff in your own image? That's something that can be looked at. Which organisations are you working with and engaging with? If yours is an organisation which is a particularly, which doesn't have a lot of diversity, I'm not suggesting that you sack all your staff tomorrow to try and deal with that, but you might look at wanting to engage with other community groups so that you've got those discussions and some of that diversity going backwards and forwards. Have you got a recruitment program to look at how you can adjust things going forward? Do you have volunteers, for example? Are there volunteers that you can engage with who can work within your organisation to try and add to some of that diversity? And diversity isn't just about having non-white faces in your organisation. It's about how you approach the work that you're doing as well. So are you all looking at things such as, cultural sensitivity? There's something called the Equal Treatment Bench Book, and that's something that judges are meant to look at. So often as a lawyer, we may find ourselves in court with clients who we think, their experiences aren't being listened to or taken on board because of who they are and what their background is. Actually, there is some challenge there. It's possible there is some pushback there. It's possible to draw the judge on that case, the Equal Treatment Bench Book, that talks about cultural sensitivity and cultural differences, how some people might have, present with can tell a story in a chronological fashion, others do it in a non-linear fashion. So I think there are definitely, real and practical steps that can be taken. As I say, Section 149 of the Equality Act is a thing that sets out the equality duty. And I'm not saying that you should look at it because you should be worried about being in breach of it. I'm saying look at it because it sets out a very good framework and a good starting point for these discussions. So if at the heart of the work we're doing is our diverse group, our beneficiaries, our victims of trafficking, our survivors, if we know that body of people to be a diverse group of individuals, how are we best serving their needs? So that's why I say look at the equality duty, because it's a way of sparking those discussions and thinking about what you're really doing.
Yes. So, thank you, Jamila.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The public sector equality duty, I guess there's an onus on most of us, even if we're not public sector organizations, we're charitable organizations, we're delivering services for the public. So the onus really should be on every single charitable organization to make sure that it can actually meet the requirements of that piece of legislation. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you. So we're running short of time, so I really want to move on very quickly and introduce Juliet. Juliet, are you here? Juliet is the chair of the London Survivors Group and one of our former service users at Afroca. Juliet, are you here?
Yeah, hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. Good
It's
afternoon,
nice to see
everyone.
you.
Same here. And I think I can see Adjoa. I think I know her before. I don't know if she remember me. Hi, Adjoa.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Okay. I don't know where to start from though. Sorry, guys. Okay. I think I'm here just to share my own experience with this whole Black Lives Matters and how.
Yes, I do remember you.
Yeah, Joa. Hopefully.
I just saw your face. I was about to take a photo of you to share with Annabelle. Sorry, I've interrupted. Let me know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm here because I think my leader, she's here. Me. Last year I got introduced to join Survivor Alliance, which is it's kind of like a voice of bringing other survivors together and try to create an opportunity and a need try to create opportunity for whatever the needs are. So my own vision for leading the Survivor Alliance London was to get other survivors that are still in the process of getting the document or that have gone through the process. And because it's one thing to be in the process waiting for a decision to be made by the Home Office, and like the guy MD said, it's another thing when you get it. It's another process of getting of being settled. So, and okay, my own experience at the beginning of when I started my own asylum process, though I think I could remember in May 2016, where I was in the Home Office for the first interview, there was a guy that was very, very like, it was as if he was the one that is going to make the decision. He was telling me that I was lying. The way the whole process started, it made me like gave up at the beginning, even before going to a group with Adjoa, meeting Debbie. So then after that, while I was in a safe house at Medai Trust in Westhampton at that time, the staff, they assign you to a special case, a different caseworker. So the caseworker at that time was being, I don't know if he's going to be racist, I'm going to call her. They tell you, because she's an Italian lady, so whenever you need anything, you go to her. But in that process of going to her, she won't give you an answer, she won't point in the right direction. But whereas why the Albania, the Romania, the other white people goes to her, she point them in the right direction, which made you question yourself that, are you not good enough to ask her a question, or why is she acting that way? Or she wasn't only doing that to me, but I noticed she did that to other, like the 3 or 4 Black ladies that were there. And she was the one that supported, they missed the people she support. So she was supporting 2 Black ladies and 2, because we were 8 in the house. So, but she doesn't give us answer. Whereas when I go to the other lady, the other Black lady, she gives everyone answer. The other lady treats everyone the same. But with her, even with the boss, everyone did the same thing. So which made me question, like, why is this happening? So now running the Survivor Alliance London with the help of Mil, Tamara, and Lady Jenny, it made me like work with so many people from different organizations, and working with where I work as well, it made you know how to deal with other people from different diversity. So not just only Black. I don't like the situation whereby you specify you work with only Black, or you work with, yes, you can be working with only one organization, but whereby I think your action as an individual, it matters a lot. So whereby you say you favor one person than the other, it's like having 2 kids and favoring one more than the other. It's not right, it's not done. So whether being Black or whether being white, we are all one. So we come from different places, different backgrounds. So we have to try and learn and treat each other the way we are and the way we want to be treated. If you want to be treated fairly, you have to treat someone else fairly. So I think that's it. I don't know. Am I going wrong?
No.
Sorry, guys.
Your contribution is absolutely useful. Very, very useful, because you've made a very important point in relation to staffing within organizations that are supposed to be kind, to help, and to support.
Yeah, because even the staff tells you you're lying. The staff does not believe you. It's not, I don't think it's in there. We have enough to deal with the Home Office already than having to deal with the staff that is supposed to be supporting us as an asylum, as the whole process. So the staff needs to be really, really, I don't know how to say, if there's a way, for my one, if there's a way to sorry to use the language, to remove all the staff and put the survivors there, that would be really nice, but there's no way that can be done. But if there's a way that survivors' voice can be heard, because we are the one wearing the shoe, we are the one, it's different from whereby A that has not gone through that process. A does not know what B is going through, and the same with B as well. So we all have to have that spirit of empathy, like, you don't have to judge. Don't judge. That's what most of the staff were doing to us at that time. We're judging us. We're telling us we're lying. We're telling us, oh, you're not truthful. Or it's hard to remember things specifically. So if we forget things, you don't judge us by that thing. But that was what we're going through as an asylum process. Even now that we've still gone through that process, we're still going through this whole thing day by day. So it does not make any sense. So we all need to learn, and we all need to have that spirit of kindness in us. For us, if every one of us has the spirit of kindness, it's going to go a long way. If you have that impact on someone else, that person is going to have that same impact on someone. But if you treat someone wrongly, that person might go treat somebody else wrongly because of what they've got for someone else.
Absolutely.
So that's what I have to say.
Juliet, you have no idea. Yourself and MD, your contribution is absolutely fantastic. And the points you raised today, those are points that every single organization working in anti-slavery needs to go back and have a meeting with all their staff to ask one key question. Are we being racist to the people we're meant to be supporting? Are we causing them more harm than good? Are we really helping them, or are we making their lives a lot more difficult? Every single organization in anti-slavery, anti-trafficking needs to be asking themselves that question right now. So thank you so much for raising those points.
Thank you for having me.
It's very nice to see you again.
Same here. Miss you.
Miss you too. Take care. Thank you. Thanks, Juliet. Thank you. So on that note, let me open this up to some questions, and we don't really have a lot of time for a lot of questions. I will take about 2 or 3 questions, very quick and snappy questions. Is anybody raising there? Who's Joseph? Can you say something, please, Joseph? Joseph, you have your hands raised up. No? Anybody else has any points? So, any questions? Anybody? Joseph?
There's a few people with their hands up.
I think they've put their hands down now.
So there's Tom, Dr. AD, and Adua who will have questions.
Okay, I can see that. Can you?
And Alessia.
Yeah,
yes,
Dr. Adi. Dr. Adi, do you want to call me Dr. Adi? Dr. Adi?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Debbie. Thank you for asking me. I think I've written a question down. Asking about what the religious groups are doing about this. Yes, they have. They don't keep quiet. I think they should have something to say about this.
Okay, so that's fine. So I mean, the Medai Trust that she talked about is actually a religious organization. So I don't know if there's anybody from the Medai Trust to say anything in relation to these points, because they're very powerful points that Juliet has raised in terms of service delivery. Yeah. MD, do you want to say a few words? MD.
Hello. Yes. Just a quick word. I would just like to add in this point that from today, I mean, I just came here specifically to pass this message that whatever you have listened from us, whatever we have discussed, please, can we make sure that happens?
Yeah. Okay.
This is my desire, and this is also my desire. The reason I'm studying law at this moment, because I was penalized, because I had injustice, which I don't want the future victims of modern day slavery and trafficking do face in this country. And there's a huge misconception, I would like to add that as well, that most of the cases, the men are not the victim of modern day slavery and trafficking. This is happening a lot hiddenly inside the community. And just to make you sure, this is happening with laws, with the ethnic minority people, it is very crucial to look after as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, MT. Do we have any other comments or questions? We need to move more very swiftly. Yeah.
Debbie,
yes.
Joe Dixon. No, Joe Dixon's had her hand up for a long time.
Sorry, so I'm not really sure what's happening with my system here. I can't actually see the raised hands.
Well, ask for Joe Dixon. Yeah. She's got her hand up.
Yes.
So, I've got my hand up. Like you said, I've had it up for.
Sorry, please.
two things that I just wanted to raise. And the first thing is just to say how immensely proud I am of you, Juliet. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen you, and we worked together a long time ago. And I think you are amazing. I think you spoke eloquently, beautifully, and you are a true representative of the type of person who should be out there advocating for survivors of trafficking. You know, you talk about people who have been through the experience being the ones to be in those positions, and I think really you would fulfill that role. So well done to you. The other thing that I wanted to comment on was that it was something that Jamila said about people changing their names because you know, they felt that their names were, people were angry with them because they couldn't pronounce their names, and it has so much resonance for me, partly because I have a name that nobody can ever pronounce, partly because I don't look like where my name comes from. Also, it's something that I'm Jamaican, and it's something that that's what they did to slaves in Jamaica. So it shocks me that it still goes on, and I still see it with the women that I work with sometimes, that I will ask them, what's your actual name? And they say, but call me this because it's too hard to pronounce. And I feel that it's something that we have got to encourage a little bit more to get people to have pride in what is actually their own, and not to adopt the to adopt names just because it's easier for I hate to say white English people don't understand, but it's not even just white English people, it's everybody. So those are just the points that I wanted to raise, but yeah, that's me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are very important points, you know. So when you force somebody to change their name so that it's palatable for you, it's easier for you to pronounce their name, you are actually contributing to the dehumanization of that person. Somebody is already a victim, so they've been victimized by somebody. They've been victimized by the system, and you're meant to be supporting them, but you're also stripping them of their identity simply because you cannot be bothered to pronounce their name. There's so many issues here. There's not enough time to even begin to deconstruct all of these issues. So thank you very much for that contribution. I'm going to take one more question, and that's Tom Griffiths. And please keep it very very short and snappy. And Tom, are you there? Yeah, very quickly. You have 30 seconds.
You need to unmute yourself, Tom. Tom, you need to unmute yourself. Unfortunately, we can't hear.
Yeah, don't. Okay. As I just feel there's a lack of political will in all this. Back in 2012, Theresa May said this human trafficking, modern slavery was the issue of our time, biggest challenge. And I think 10 years on, you look at the political debate, you look at the media, you look at the news, does it seem like this is the biggest challenge? One of the biggest challenges in society? No, it's, for those who are outside this sector, it's spurious reporting or minor reporting. It's not a major issue. Never mind Brexit, economy, and all those other things. It's a very, very minor issue. I think there's a lack of political will. And going back to Professor Craig, who I know has done some outstanding work in this field, the historical context of the 19th century, I think we're making the same errors. It seems to be a few heroic white rescuers saving black victims from trauma with a lack of community voices and representation and leading the sector. And I've always found that the people I listen to from these communities have got so much to offer, so much to say, but are so frustrated because you have a lack of representation.
Thank you so much, Tom. Excellent. So let's move on to the next set of speakers. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Ming, who is the Director of Survivors Alliance, who will talk to us about the work that they do with survivors. Advocating for survivors. So Ming, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to just first share that the way that we come to this work is from our value of resilient relationships. I wanted to define it for you. So for us, resilient relationships are ones that can withstand conflict and challenge. People within the relationship can discuss how their actions impact one another. We will reflect on our own intentions and consider the context of our relationships and interactions. Healthy, resilient relationships include celebration, seeking to understand, and the ability to mend hurts. We commit to staying open to the idea that we may not be right. It's each person's responsibility to manage their expectations about the relationship and communicate clearly. And I share that with you because I'm going to be a critical friend today and hope that you can stay in a resilient relationship with me, whether you know me and Survivor Alliance or not. I'm not going to go too in depth into our broader work, but I will say and echo what Juliet said. It is our hope that survivors are a majority in this space in the future. So we're not trying to take away people's jobs per se, but we believe that survivors need to be at the table in positions of power, not just to share our lived experience, although that is valid and important and its own form of expertise. We have survivors that will be future lawyers who are lawyers now probably, but have not come out, and we need to be seen as actual professionals in this field. I want to actually ask people, how many of you have actually thought about what it's like to be called a survivor of slavery or a survivor of human trafficking? Have you read the definitions? What does that mean? Have you thought about the implications in relationship to colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade? I personally have wrestled with it, and I can explain to Black people who tell me they find it profoundly insulting why I identify that way, and I'm willing to be challenged on it. I think that's fundamentally important, is because I will not diminish the history of the legacy of slavery and why we're having this conversation, the murder of George Floyd and many others. But my problem is that slavery has never been defined by survivors themselves, by the people who've lived through it. I also think we need to understand that the history of social services is racist to its core. It has been used to be a controlling space in terms of how we deliver services, because we need to change the backwards, savage, quote unquote, people, right? And so it is actually us entering into social services that can be a reenactment of racist practices. So how do we not think about people as service users, but actually people that we are walking alongside and accompanying in our collective journey to freedom? So there's conversations about white saviorhood that we also need to think about when we're thinking about diversity within the anti-trafficking space. For me, fundamentally, it has started, no, that shouldn't be my time. The history is the fact that it's called diversity and inclusion means that exclusion has already been in place. So the system in place to seek inclusion is already a failure. And what is going to happen is tokenization. So therefore, we need to actually look for systemic change. That is why Survivor Alliance is trying to support survivors to one day take over my job, run their own organizations, have the capacity to serve and be peer mentors, to actually think about changing the system, not just changing the representation within an already racist system. I want to also talk about emotional labor. So I imagine for the other people of color, minorities on this call, you are overworked this last many months about conversations about race. I want to acknowledge that, and I want us all to think about how this is often added burden to the people who are having the conversations. I have a therapy session scheduled right after this. I think it's important that we acknowledge we talk about it with social workers. They have clinical supervision. Dealing with diversity and equity and inclusion requires people to have additional clinical supervision, whether it's clinical work or not, because often we are carrying the burden of having to educate people and to keep ourselves from responding to ignorant comments in ways that we know aren't going to be helpful. We know they're not personal, but we've heard them over and over and over, right? So in this work, we need to fund this work. We can't ask people to do diversity and inclusion as a side job. It has to be paid. It has to be part of people's daily jobs. So Survivor Alliance includes it in our staff time, paid time to read, educate, and discuss as a team issues of anti-racism and any other types of discrimination. Third, I think that we all need to think about how, if we put survivors into positions of power, we will have diversity and inclusion. And that in of itself, for me, brings together two of my interests, which is to have ethnic and racial diversity, but also having survivors in positions of power. I don't know what number I'm on, but I recommend everybody read this book. This is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. And this is about courageous leadership. And this will help us individually be able to show up to difficult conversations. I'll put it in the chat shortly. Because we need to think about the difference between toxic shame and guilt and healthy shame and guilt. It is the toxic shame and guilt that is going to keep people from being able to have these conversations. But if we can foster a healthy conversation about our shame and guilt, then I think we have somewhere to move. But I want to hold the fact that when we get into these conversations, people get quite defensive and then the conversation shuts down. But if we don't know to have conversations that open up more space, then we're going to continue to be challenged to move anything forward. Some actions I want to place on the table. So read the book, read about color blindness and challenge issues of color blindness. This is about, people who say, I don't see color. Obviously people see color unless you're colorblind, and even colorblind people see some color. So we need to discuss this constant concern about not wanting to see color. Third, there are assessments for how to be an anti-racist organization. Survivor Alliance has them linked on our website. We're committing to do that. If you want to be an accountability buddy, you can reach out and we will do them and discuss and share openly. We are putting that up on our website, is the things that we're committed to doing, and asking people to hold us accountable and for us to do that with you. So make public the things that you're doing, let people know. And then lastly, I'll say, we need to be focusing on recruitment and retention. I think a lot of times we think about, okay, recruitment, let's hire diverse groups of people, but then we don't change the culture so that they retain and they stay there, because you can't just get diverse people to show up in organizations not designed for them and then expect them to stay if it's an unsafe culture. So retention policies are also really important. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ming. That's extremely useful. The notion of seeing survivors, not just as people that we do things for, but we should also even start to think about how we can empower them to do the work themselves. So one of my ambitions at Africa is that when I do finally decide to go somewhere else, maybe retire or resign, I don't know, one of the things that will really please me the most is to find that my job is being taken over by somebody that the charity used to support. It's a service user. So thank you so much for that. Because we're now running short of time, I really want to move on very, very quickly. And we have Madeline Adenaike, who is the CEO of the Music Relief Foundation. I don't know if you're here, Madeline. Please, call her if you're there. But one of the things about Music Relief is that they do a lot of very good work, prevention work, in BME communities where children are at risk of county lines trafficking. And organizations like this, their voices are never heard. You only hear of the big names who are working at the very top. And it's important that we start to bear in mind that there's so many good quality organizations on the ground who are doing fantastic work. So we've invited Madeline to talk about some of the work that they do and some of the challenges that they're facing. So if you're there, Madeline, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's great to be here and to hear everybody speak so passionately about their various roles and concerns of what's been happening within their various sectors and fields. As already been said, so my name is Magdalene Adenaike, founder and chief executive of Music Relief Foundation. We are a grassroots youth charity working with young people, and we've been in existence now 9 years. We're going to be celebrating our 10th anniversary in January. Many of the things we do is predominantly around young people, and in recent times we've began to look at focusing on working with the families as well. So we've been working with the families indirectly, but now kind of looking at directly providing services for the parents and guardians and all those particular cohorts. We work within the schools in providing prevention and workshops, identifying, so with the schools, identifying young people that the schools have classed as at risk and vulnerable in getting into criminal activities, already within criminal activities, because many of the times you find that the kids are being excluded from mainstream schools and placed in PRUs. And with that being said, I will talk briefly about an example of a young man whose mom called onto us and said, please, can you assist me to go to this meeting with the head teacher because this child is on the verge of being excluded. So he was suspended on several times. And when we looked at the report for this young man, there was nothing concrete that could be said that this young man was actually disruptive in class. The main thing that came across is that he's 15 and coming on 16, but at the time, this 14-year-old young black boy, is because he's tall, he's got a big voice. So when he talks in class, he's easily heard. So he can't whisper because you will hear him. And because he's always talking, those are the key things that they were using to highlight the fact that this child is being disruptive. There was issues of fact that, oh, this boy, he's a danger to the fellow students and his fellow students are afraid of him. And this is someone that is very friendly and he has large groups of friends around him. And so this child was always being penalized, and it got to the point that the head teacher finally decided that they were going to exclude him. So I was there at the hearing with the committee members, and so a member of the committee was not supposed to be there because he used to be a tutor for that child, and now he's part of that committee. So already that boy was at a disadvantage, and it was only afterwards that we found this out, so that was disqualified. But nonetheless, the head teacher had already made up her mind that she wanted to kick him out. And in speaking with other head teachers in the same area, it was found that this particular head teacher had an issue with so many of these children, and that's her kind of like her pattern. And so as we speak right now, this young man is in a PRU. And I remember before him being, this Saturday before the Monday he was due to start, he said to me, Magdalene, in a childish voice, I don't want to go to a PRU, and this is a child. And I'm saying, you know what, we've tried, we've fought, we've done all we possibly can, involved in the local council and everything, but unfortunately this is where we are. Let's see how much support we can give to you in this PRU. And now this child is in a PRU and he's had to move again because they've moved from the borough they were into another borough. But the problem here is the fact that this child is saying that, why am I being penalized? Because I'm placed in an environment that there are other people who are much worse than me, who are actively involved in gangs, we have daily gangs visiting that place. So we're visiting that area to kind of, in a sense, recruit per se young people. So my discussion today is looking at counting lines and connecting it to human trafficking, because most of the times that has been excluded. So when we're talking about human trafficking, are we including county lines as well? Because that is in the same precedence of when you're thinking about sending off young children off to various places for them to deliver drugs. We also work within the prisons and work with women who, again, themselves have been trafficked. And because of this trafficking, they found themselves in prison through no fault of themselves because they wanted money. And obviously they were promised heaven and earth for them to be able to do this. And before you find it now, they find themselves in prison. So as a grassroots charity, one of the things that we have been excluded from over and over and over, has already been said, is the fact that because we are not the big named organizations, we do not matter. But we do matter, not just the length of time that we've been in existence, but also the fact that we are working in the community. We may be grassroots, but the strength that we have is that the families, the communities can trust us. We are reliable. We were referred by another family, by somebody who said, you need to go to them. And they particularly said, go to Magdalene. She's one of the good ones. Those were the words that came out from this lady's mouth when she told me about who referred her. And she said that, and when she came to me, I was like, okay, what can we help you with? It was a situation that this woman and her 3 children were being victimized by the one person that was meant to protect them, which is the father of the family, her husband and father of the children, that they had to flee their home in the early hours of the morning in order for the father not to kill them, literally. And so I was called upon with this woman to go and support her in a hearing case. And so we went there, and they were placed in a 1-bedroom apartment. So this is a woman with 2 teenage children and a young child, placed in a 1-bedroom, and then it was not convenient already, and then you're moving them from this particular area, from the borough of Croydon, you're moving them all the way to the other side of London, to Thamesmead, because that's where you found an accommodation. Bearing in mind that her son, he was 15 at the time, he's now 16, was already attacked by gangs in the area that they were living in. And so now you're sending these children, and 2 of the children are going to have to be commuting from Thamesmead back to Croydon, and then from Croydon back to Thamesmead because of school. And you're placing them in this environment and saying to them, yes, that's where we found. So I remember going to that meeting, and the ladies that were there, who are social workers, who are supposed to support them, were saying, well, that's the best we can do. And the tone of arrogance that was coming from their mouth. And I said, excuse me, this woman is already suffering with her children. How can you then tell me that that's the best thing that you can possibly do? And they said, well, she cannot be in this borough because of fear of the partner. But well, the fight was the fact that this lady needed to be there because of the fact that her children were at school, and the young man at that time was just about to embark on his GCSEs. Obviously, we know that didn't happen, but this was last year. Now you're putting him in a faraway place, and you're putting him in a danger with all the other gangs that was going to be there. What support are you giving to them? So the impact here we want to talk about here, it's looking at, when we are talking about county lines and when we're talking about human trafficking, these should not be things that are separated. These should be things that should be combined together. And people, organizations like Music Relief, thank you, Tamara, should be included within these discussions. We should be setting up working groups that will influence government policies, because it's important that the young people's voice, I'm very passionate about the young people and about their needs and their concerns, because at the end of the day, the truth about it is that one day we're all going to pass away. They are the ones that's going to take over. What world are we living for them? So we need to be included and not excluded because we are not named organizations. We need to be included in these discussions with the Home Office. We need to set up strategies that will influence and contribute to actual working practices, not just the hearsay, because I've been in several meetings and they come to us and say, what are your young people saying? They just want to come and take information. I'm tired of giving the information and then being excluded at the end of the day. But also to add that it's not just about being included, but also to know that most of us are doing this out of passion. We can't live on passion alone. Money is needed. So we need to think about all of these things when we are having these discussions. So I'm so glad for Debbie and to Tamara as well for bringing this forum together, because it's important that all of these things are happening, so that the next follow-up now is working groups that include organizations like myself, looking at county lines and how they connect to human trafficking and what are the next possible steps. Empower us in that sense, that way we are able to go out there and support, because the families are crying. We see all these missing posters of the children daily. It's not for us to just sit and say they're there. It's about actually actively working and ensuring that these children's voices, the families' voices, organizations like ours voices are being heard on a daily basis. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Madeleine. That obviously comes across as very passionate about the subject matter. And I don't know if Sarah is still there, the independent commissioner is still there, but this is one of the issues that I think we need to start looking at. I'm not very comfortable with organizations who are not doing any work on county lines trafficking being at the forefront of it. I think that the work should be done by grassroots organizations who are passionately working on this issue, who know what the families are going through, what the children are going through, and who are doing whatever they can to support them. And so one of the things I'm going to do as soon as we finish, I am going to write an email to the commissioner to ask her to hold a roundtable meeting of as many of the grassroots organizations working on county lines that we can find, for her to start to talk to them about the work that they're doing and what can be done to support them. So thank you very much, Madeleine. Thank you for that. So, yes. Oh, are you? Oh, you're there. Oh, thank you. Oh, excellent.
And just to reassure the speakers, when we talk about modern slavery and human trafficking, yes, it does include county lines. And part of the explanation of the growth of children being referred is because of county lines. So it is very definitely in the statistics. The difficulty that I think we've got is that identifying is always a problem. I'm not sure how well referrals operate, but the other issue is about interventions and support for children caught up in that sort of activity. There is some work being done around contextual safeguarding and some very interesting academic work. Some of you might have seen Carleen Furman's work on this. That most of the time social services have been focused about abuse within the family. When the abusers are coming from outside the family, the range of interventions have been less developed. It's something that I'm really quite concerned about. And Debbie, somebody from my office is going to reach out to you with a suggestion that somebody could come, because I am doing some work on it and we'd like to get some involvement. So I completely agree, it's an issue. We do need to identify what works in this area, because I think we're letting down a lot of our children a lot of the time.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for that. So let's move on swiftly and invite Matthew Showemimo from the Salvation Army to talk to us about Salvation Army's work around this, and of course how they're addressing the issues of equality and diversity in the work that they do with victims. So Matthew, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for inviting us. So Tamara at the beginning rightly stressed that we should focus on specifics, what needs to be done. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and focus on what the Salvation Army intends to do and what public sector organisations outside the NRM who are delivering services to survivors, what they should do. And lastly, touch on what Sarah said about data, which relates to the government and relates to the Home Office. So first of all, what I think would be helpful is to take the concepts of indirect discrimination, indirect race discrimination that many of you will be familiar with, which is in the Equality Act. And central to that concept is, if you treat people who have very different cultural starting points, from very different backgrounds, if you treat them all in the same way, that can have a detrimental impact on them. And you know, so if there is a rule, there's a law, if there's a practice is applied evenly, it may actually damage people because it doesn't take into account their difference. So one potential example in our field is, depending on what your country of origin is or your cultural setting, you may have a different conception of what constitutes exploitation and exploitative practices. So that's something that we intend to take into account, for example, in our literature. Our literature is developed about what the NRM is, about what exploitation is. But that's just an example of the broader point that we need to be much more culturally sensitive to people's differing backgrounds. And one way that we as the Army can ensure that we do that is ensuring that the survivor voice is there, working with us, working alongside us to shape the services that we are providing throughout in the NRM. So as part of the new Home Office contract, there are new services that are going to be created, and we want to work with survivors and ensure there is a strong survivor voice in shaping the design of those services so that people are present from creation, if you like, rather than that we say deliver a service and say, here's our service, be happy with it. So that's point one. Point two is, there are many service providers in the public sector, for example, those people who are delivering mental health services, people who are delivering particularly housing, where there is a huge challenge. And the question is whether they, in delivering those services, whether they're delivering services that are sufficiently culturally sensitive to survivors. And you know, the Equality Act, as we all know, is in place in the UK, and local authorities, other service providers, they are subject to the Equality Act. And one of the questions that we have is how far they are building their knowledge of survivors and modern slavery, so they can deliver culturally sensitive services. You know, it is not about their intentions often. You know, people can, it's more about whether, say, delivering a service that may be appropriate to people who are UK nationals, people who've grown up in the UK, whether that service will be able to be sensitive and responsive to, say, to people from West African backgrounds, people from Southeast Asia, etc. So we think there's something that the Equality Act can be an instrument for positive change. The other thing is that how do we measure, how do we know if we are delivering equality and diversity throughout this sector and throughout the victim care contract? So there are going to be new victim pathways, and what we feel is it's important that there are very clear equality and diversity measures for those pathways. And part of that, in developing those measures, is about not us marking our own homework. Is our survivors going to have a role about what they regard as pathways that are sensitive to their situation? I'd just like to go back to what Dame Sarah said about data. Her point was obviously about, do we have the disaggregated data about people who are UK nationals, people of county lines? But I'd also say it's a bigger thing than that. Do we have the data that shows that for conclusive grounds decisions and reasonable grounds decisions, do we have that broken down by country of origin? And secondly, are we able to reflect on where there are significant differences and unwarranted differences in the decisions that are made by the single competence authority based on the country of origin? So one is, do we have the data? Secondly is, what are our reflection points on what that data says to us? I just want to conclude by saying we all listened to Juliet. I don't know whether Juliet's still here, but you raise matters of significant concern about your experience in the NRM and your experience in the Madai Trust Safe House. Want to, you can be supported to bring a formal complaint about that. That may not be what you want. If you want us as the Salvation Army to listen and reflect on that, and or you may want something else. So I just want to be clear about that. I'm concerned about what you've related, and if you'd like to discuss it directly with me or colleagues, then we'd like to do that. Thank you very much. I should just like to say, it's so nice to be introduced by someone pronouncing my surname correctly.
Thank you.
Your point. Name is your identity.
I know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, definitely. Yes, my Nigerian brother. So, thank you. It's nice to see you. But I mean, the issues around victim care and how we can begin to standardize practices in relation to racism or anti-racism, diversity and inclusion is very important. And I think that the Salvation Army needs to start to look at that. And we do have a document. We have the victim, I mean, Tamara, please remind me what it's called now, the victim care standards.
Survivor care standards.
Yeah, we need to review that document so that we have some very clear-cut guidelines around diversity and inclusion. And I guess that's something we can start to talk to the Home Office about. So thank you very much for that, Matthew. So because we only have 10 minutes left, and I want to ask a favor. I want to ask for your permission to extend this session by maybe another 10 minutes. So we finish about 4:10, just so that we can hear all the speakers and we can have a very good quality conclusion. So it's not just rushed through. So if you're happy with that, we'll finish at 4:10, yeah? So based on that, can I please invite Christy Braham? Christy, are you here? Christy Braham, to speak on behalf of Liz in relation to research in the anti-trafficking sector. Are you here, Christy?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi everyone.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
Thank you for everyone's contributions. So just a disclosure. I'm a PhD researcher at University of Sheffield, and my supervisor, Dr. Liz Such, was supposed to be talking today, but unfortunately she can't be here. So I thought I would just give a really short, a very, very, very short and unprepared sort of introduction to sort of our thoughts on this topic. So yeah, so from our side, so we actually, we are, you know, we're actually from the School of Health and Related Research. So we're actually looking at public health responses to modern slavery. So the ways in which health professionals or public health practitioners can have a role to play, for example, in identifying cases of modern slavery, and also prevention, because that's also it's also a very overlooked area. So there's a lot of there's a lot of emphasis on policing and criminalization, and using the Home Office and other immigration related services. But actually, health professionals do have a role to play, and that role needs to be better emphasized, and they should be better supported and have the tools to really be able to be of service to people who actually have to go through this ordeal. But one of the things that we've, obviously in light of everything that, everyone's saying about, this topic and diversity and stuff like that, one of the things that we want to, I guess, bring to the table as public health researchers is, of course, acknowledging the ways in which race and racism have been really, really, really overlooked in trafficking more generally, not just, and that's not specific to public health. That's, of course, every sector that's involved, that has contact with people who've been trafficked. And as academics, so just sort of copying the pattern of everyone talking about their sector and how it's really non-diverse. As academics, academia is horribly sort of undiverse. So you have this issue of people who want to research a specific area, or a specific topic within trafficking, but somehow very conveniently seem to misunderstand or pay almost no attention to why people are exploited and how race plays a critical role in that. And a lot of that also has to do with who's doing the research. Academia is very, very white, middle class, and also male led. So that it's, we do have an issue. We have a very, very serious issue, just like every other sector. So it's not necessarily about the answers. It's about, are you asking the right questions? And up to now, I don't think those questions have really been asked properly in the UK context, at least. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is trying to see ways in which we can actually involve and center the voices of those who are involved in the trafficking sector, regardless of what, whether you're sort of a lawyer or whether you are involved in civil society, or whether you're involved in policing, trying to get lots of heads together and do some participatory research. Really going out to speak to people and get their views, and explore race and ethnicity, racism, see how these are represented in the sector, what we can do better to make it more diverse, more representative of the people who this sector is supposed to be in service to, and how we can push back against various different racist structures and practices. So we've been in conversation with Debbie a lot on this, and we want to start a consultation group as well, and we're actually looking at funding options to, in order to have this structure in place, and to have it in place for maybe for initially for 2 years. So actually, one of the great so Liz knows much more about this than I do. I just sort of stepped in just to to see if I could have a chat to everyone here. So one of the things that I would really appreciate would be anyone who may be interested in, at some point in the future, getting involved in some participatory research, involved, even just to have a chat with us about your views, and ensure that we can really kind of make a dent in this, and really and really try and change things from the academic perspective. We would really love to, if anyone is interested, if you want to send a private chat message to me with your email address, then I can give them to Liz. And if you have any questions, she could reach out to you and give you all the information you need, and take it from there. So we'd really love to hear from so many of you, because obviously you are so experienced in all your various fields. So it'd be fabulous.
Well, thank you so much, Christy. That's really useful. So, like you said, we've had conversations with Liz about establishing a BASNET research consultative group, where our members, and obviously most of our core members, all our core members are grassroots BME organizations who are never involved in research at that level. If they're involved in research, it's because somebody wants to pick their brain. I get that a lot. We get at least 2 requests to take part in research at Africa every single week. And a lot of the time, if there's no money being mentioned, I don't reply, because it's a waste of my time, really. So I guess the key issue really is, how those who are taking part in these activities can be supported financially, because it is their time that they're spending on these projects as well. So thank you so much for that, Christy. So we're going to move on very swiftly, and I would like to introduce Nina, a Program Director of Human Trafficking and Migration Master's Degree Program at St. Mary's University. Are you there, Nina?
Yes, Debbie, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for this invite to speak, Debbie. Time is limited, so I'd just like to say this, what I want to add really builds on many of the excellent points that people before me during the day have already made. Issues that Juliet touched on, MD touched on, Jamila, Magdalena, Deborah, and Christy now in relation to research. So thank you all very much. I'm coming to this from a research perspective to highlight some important challenges, and everybody in the first panel also has highlighted some of these issues from their own perspectives in the roles that they play, the very important roles that they play. And I just want to reiterate that these challenges that confront us in really conceptualizing and acknowledging that race within our discussions in the modern slavery and human trafficking sector have actually been missing. And what I want to say is that the important starting point here is to acknowledge this disparity and this gap, but also to understand how we're going to kind of work together to address this. And my starting point here is drawing upon my years of academic and policy research in tracking ethnic and racial disparities and disproportionality in criminal justice, and how we as multicultural societies, diverse societies, are coping or not very well with the potential limits and these kind of temptations of identity issues, of understanding difference in very important areas such as human trafficking, understanding modern day slavery, acknowledging it even, migration, and also human rights, but coming to it from a criminal justice perspective. So the national kind of referral mechanism provides us a good starting point to start, unpicking some of the problems here in relation to modern day slavery and what we are doing about it. And although the data is available, but again, this whole issue of data is actually my starting point, but actually it also is linked with the second point of political will. And I'd like to highlight the role of the charitable and voluntary sector here, but also the role of academia, because I speak not just in relation to my role as an academic, but I also chair Voice for Change England, which is a Black-led umbrella infrastructure body, which works on various policy issues. And I've also helped to set up another organization called Stopwatch, which I help to run on a daily basis. We talk about fair and accountable policing. And the reason why I stress on this is because I find that the issues that we are confronting actually really are similar to the challenges that are being confronted in discussing race, or even in the effort of discussing race, ethnicity, and the disparities, the overrepresentation, the issues of underrepresentation in exactly the same sector. So I suggested this to Deborah previously, to Debbie, that there is so much good practice in the sector. What have we learned? So I think coming back here to Sarah, who has previously been the Chief Constable of Thames Valley, has understood the problems that we have as a sector within criminal justice to undertake real consultation, to engage communities that are distanced, and why are they distanced, and to acknowledge some of that. And then also with what very importantly, Lola Young and the work that she has done in so many reviews within the criminal justice system, let alone the race disparity audit, but really importantly the Lamy review, the Lola Young review, that speak to and address the issues of racial disproportionality, ethnic disproportionality at different stages of the criminal justice process. And this is the lack of research that we have, that Magdalena was talking about in relation to county lines. What areas of disproportionality are we not getting? Because we see them very clearly within criminal justice. Why aren't we talking about them in relation to our efforts at addressing modern day slavery as well as human trafficking? So there are clearly some gaps here. There are problematic gaps equally within academia, problematic gaps in the sociology of race and in the emerging literature in criminology, the legal context that Deborah Lashley Bob talks about and understands well, the tensions within around, migration control and the systems that are at play there. And in analyzing, how modern slavery and issues of human trafficking, race can be that important dimension, which we always, sort of overlook. So again, looking at the criminal justice process, what is typically happening in relation to prevention and prosecution? What is the role played by police, the prosecution, the Crown Prosecution Service, and also further on in the system, what efforts are being made to better understand what is happening in relation to resettlement, what is happening in our prison system. I heard Dr. Addy at another BASNET meeting talking about what's not going on very well in prisons and so on. So, that is the amount of work that needs to be done in really trying to bring together what have we mapped in relation to race and ethnicity in criminal justice to, in my view, attaches itself really well and in analyzing the problems. So there are 4 key points in relation to the Modern Slavery Act that we as a group should be discussing and relating to. One is how race and ethnicity constitute a risk factor for trafficking, and to what extent are we actually implementing that in practice. And thanks, Tamara. And race and ethnicity determining the treatment of survivors' experiences, quite well put by people who are speaking today. Race and ethnicity increasing the likelihood of further victimization and re-victimization. And so really trying to understand what parallels exist with the current operation of the criminal justice system, and what is the color line here when it comes to talking about supporting our survivors and also addressing some of their needs, because that specific cultural understanding also, and this is where the sector, charitable sector, can play a really important role. And I've just posted here some of the important findings from a really important report that we've just published at Voice for Change in partnership with Akivo about home truths. And so I'd invite people here on this forum today to actually have a look at that and to really understand how ingrained and systemic Issues of racism and race also are in the charitable sector, also academia, which Christy has already spoken to, so I'm not going to waste my time, but also to say that as an academic, but also as a person who works in the charitable sector, how deeply I appreciate that there's a huge problem here and that we can't address these issues alone. So we actually have to have a collaborative effort in relation to not just understanding the data, so working with the statutory partners to, really address the gaps in data, because that's not the data we want. We want more nuanced data about outcomes at each stage of decision making. Where is that data? And we don't have access to that yet. The other point is about what are we doing, therefore, once we have the data, how are we preparing our workforce in the charitable sector to better understand and become those activists that actually will come to addressing and discussing these issues with greater sensitivity, but also because we need to kind of work to positive outcomes. How are we developing our workforce and the skills that are required? And finally, the role of academia. So at St. Mary's, I know my colleagues who are working at the Center for the Study of Modern Slavery. We are working on understanding better and in a more in-depth way the journey of victims. So these are kind of three-pronged efforts about academia, about the legal activism and charitable sector activism and the weight of that, plus how do we work better with the statutory sector to address and to map where are those points where we can make a difference. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Nina. The very, very important point in relation to data. We cannot achieve change without data. So I guess this is a core issue that we need to keep having conversations about. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so Professor Insa Koch is not here today, but she has provided a video for us to screen. But we can't show all of it, Prof, because it's 6 minutes long and we're running short of time already. So we'll screen some of it, and if it's ready now, Katie, we can do that very quickly.
I'm sorry, Insa is also here, so she can, if we have
to, she's
also here now, yeah.
Okay, or if she's here, then she can say a few words, then we won't have to screen the video.
No, I think because she's got a very, very young child,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So let's see, okay. All right, Katie.
I think we're having a bit of problem with the sound.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know if Insa is at all able to quickly say a few words while we, unless Katie, are you able to get the sound?
Can you not hear us at all?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure why that is, because it worked before.
Okay.
So we might be able to share the presentation afterwards.
Okay, I think
maybe we can send it around.
Oh, damn, that's a shame.
Insa, do you want to say words quickly now, and we'll share your video afterwards?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what went wrong. I'm just wondering, can I share my screen at least, or is that also not working?
Yes.
It says I can't share my screen while other participant is sharing.
Okay.
If you so you might be able to.
If you remove the video, then you can share yours, Insa.
Okay, let's see.
So Katie, if you stop the video, then
Yeah. So it should have stopped now.
Okay.
Okay, and you want me to speak for 2 minutes, really, or what
Yes,
was
please.
the? Oh God.
Yes, please. Because I think
Right.
we've spent 3 minutes
All right.
already.
Okay. Well, I appreciate we're running out of time. I was actually going to talk about county lines and the way modern slavery policies have been applied to that area. And as we've heard throughout the last 2 hours, this is an area where I think a lot more work needs to be done. But just very quickly, what we've seen is when modern slavery policies were introduced a few years ago, county lines and criminal exploitation was not something that government officials and policymakers had in mind as being one area where the policies could be applied. But what we have seen over the last few years is that modern slavery policies have increasingly been applied to the area of criminal exploitation. And one positive shift that has happened in the area is that frontline workers are increasingly being trained to recognize people involved in counterline drugs, not as criminals to be prosecuted, but as victims who need to be safeguarded. However, that change has been extremely slow, and far too often young people are still being prosecuted. And this is absolutely a Black Lives Matter issue, because it's mostly people from Black and minority ethnic communities who are being criminalized by that. So what I'm doing with my research, so I'm just quickly going through the slides now because I only have 2 minutes. What I've been doing for the last 2 years is really try and understand why this is the case. What are the challenges that we're facing? Why is it that so many young people are still being criminalized, and even when they're not, positive change is still slow? And just very quickly, I think there are at least 3 key challenges that we're seeing in the sector. One is the prevalence of punitive cultures. So even where there's goodwill to change, there is still very much a sort of culture of enforcement and punishment at the front line. And in order to change that, I'm jumping here straight to the pathways for positive change. In order to change that, I think what we really need to do is to have more grassroots training and grassroots action. It's not enough to have top-down training. We need to get organizations and people in who already have the trust of these communities and who can build relationships with these communities. Second, I think a key challenge that we see in relation to criminal exploitation is the lack of institutional cooperation and understanding. So many times I've come across cases where different government bodies were in outright contradiction with one another, where the NRM, for example, had found that somebody was a modern slave, had been criminally exploited, and yet CPS went ahead and charged that young person with an offense, and you end up in a horrible mess in court where there's a lack of judicial clarity. You don't know what to do with these cases. It produces delays, it produces retrials, it produces appeals, and worst of all, it produces serious cases of miscarriage of justice. So the lack of institutional cooperation is a huge issue. And what we need is a thorough review, I think, of the NRM mechanism as it applies to criminal exploitation. We need a better understanding of CPS practices and a better understanding of the relationship between CPS and NRM. And then just finally, I think this is probably the most crucial point. We cannot change the situation unless we make better resources available. Government has to make material resources available, both to the organizations that are working on the ground on these issues, but crucially also to the families who are affected by this trauma, which means we need to have better and more affordable housing. We need to have managed housing moves for people who need to move out of areas where grooming happens. And crucially also, we need to have proper access to mainstream education and training for young people who are trying to escape a life in the illicit economy. Sorry, I've completely rushed through a 6-minute presentation in a few minutes, but I'm going to stop here. And please, if I can just stop with a plea, I don't think we can change policies without the empirical evidence. So please, please feel free to contact me. You've got my email address here to share with me cases of criminal exploitation that you've come across and how we might improve policies in that area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Insa. We're so sorry that you had to rush through your presentation. And also, if you send us the presentation, we can actually circulate it to everybody.
Yeah,
so
sure.
They have it. Or maybe if you want to develop it, we can circulate it to everybody.
Yes. I would be grateful.
For this.
Maybe tomorrow I can do that. Yeah.
We'll do that. So thank you so much for that. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that's our last presentation for today. Now, because we're completely out of time, I'm just gonna kind of like take just one comment, just one question or just one comment. just to kind of like end the session today. So is anybody raising their hands? Because I can't really see. Tamara, is anybody raising their hands? I can't see all the raised hands. The very last question to any of the speakers, Madeleine, to Nina, to Christy, or to Insha. Any last question before we round off?
There's one. Wanjiku.
Okay.
Hi.
Wanjiku, yeah, please.
Yes, hi. Very quickly, my name is Wanjiku. I work for BAOZO, which is a support provider for victims of modern day slavery in Wales, also victims of domestic abuse from Black and minority ethnic communities. We cannot talk about BAME, modern day slavery experiences, without talking about no recourse to public funds, which is a big hindrance to the support that victims may get before and after they've gone through NRM. Before they go through the NRM, they may not be picked up as victims just because they have no recourse to public funds. People are not listening, and especially in statutory agencies, people are not listening to people with no recourse to public funds. They just dismiss them because they have no recourse to public funds. And for that reason, their needs, their issues may not be picked up at that point. After they've received their conclusive grounds, it doesn't give them any support in any way. Again, they become no recourse to public funds. If they were in accommodation, they have to leave. There are no recourse to public funds. They have to go back to a lot of them go back to the perpetrators after that, just to have a roof over their head. That's one point. The next very quick issue is to do with the link between modern day slavery and other issues such as forced marriage, honor-based violence, FGM, all those issues to do, which we call domestic abuse from a Black perspective, where again, these are issues with BAME communities. A lot of people that are in forced marriages and exposed to honor-based violence, they are living a life of slavery in the homes they are in. They're in domestic servitude. Their passports, the IDs have been taken away from them. They're in domestic servitude. I'm again calling for these victims to have an NRM form completed for them in every situation, because we're going to see a lot of exploitation and support and slavery there. And finally, my very last point, because I'm rushing through, I know we've gone out of time. It's with funding for domestic abuse victims. And I've listened to all the, I don't know whether to call them survivors now, but you're very courageous, and thank you so much for everything that you've said. But as that sector organizations, we most of the time find ourselves being told what to do by the funders. We're saying to them, we have this idea, but when we're writing out the bid, we're kind of being made to say what they want to hear, not necessarily what we want to say, not what the victims have said to us, not what support they've asked us to get for them. We're kind of being led to get what the funders want to fund for, not necessarily what we're saying. We are the representatives of the victims. This is what they want. Those are my thoughts for today. And
thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wanjiku, obviously we have the same issues where, you know, the dictates of the founders matter, but, you know, obviously we need the money, so we do their bidding. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, can I say thank you so much for your patience? I am just going to summarize some of the key ideas from this session. I mean, firstly, we're very pleased that Sarah, the anti-slavery commissioner, she's left now, but she's talked about hosting a meeting, you know, on county lines, which to me is an issue that we're not really looking at the right way. So that's a very good quality outcome in terms of progress. Secondly, we are going to establish a working group at BASNET. We want to be able to draw on all the very key action points that have been raised today. And we want to start following up in relation to who is responsible for carrying out or for implementing this action point. So essentially, the work is not starting today, it's only just beginning. Also, we're going to write to the Home Office about some of the issues raised in relation to policy, because I feel that they should have come here today, but we will write to them to raise some of those key issues, because we really need to start having conversations, strong conversations around the no recourse to public funds. strong conversations around what happens to survivors after they get their positive conclusive grounds, strong conversations on the plight of victims generally. We are also going to be talking to them about the victim care standards and how that is to be improved. So there's a clear-cut, guidelines in relation to racism, or should I say anti-racism, diversity and inclusion. So I'm just summarizing very quickly because I know we've run out of time. And I guess we'll send an email around to everybody who's participated today to inform them of the next step. So all this summary, we're going to put it together and send to everybody who has attended this meeting. Tamara, I don't know if you have any last words before we round up.
No, I'd like to thank all our speakers. The feedback we're getting, I can see on the chat, is people have really found this meeting really impactful. And so thank you so much to all the speakers. And thank you particularly to Debbie, who, as I said, has sort of led on this agenda for several decades and led on the agenda of this meeting today as well, which has been so impactful. So thank you, Debbie.
Okay, thank you so much, Tamara. So on that note, everybody, can I say thank you so much for your participation, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.